The original intention for this meeting of this Congress was not to throw out the articles and start over. It was to revise it. So they called it the Confederation Congress that meets in Philadelphia. We know of it now as the Constitutional Convention because it's the birthplace for the U.S. Constitution. Okay, and so the video is going to talk about that process of encouraging representatives to attend this meeting and essentially what the end result is. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do this. It may be where, you know, the sound is a little bit off to the video, but I'm fingers crossed it's going to work. Okay, so let's hope for the best here. Worst comes to worst, we may have to do a minimizing screen and not do a full screen. So, all right. Oh, I need to make sure the sound's on here. All right. So, does everybody see the full screen where it says great educators? If you don't, let me know, please.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Fingers crossed. Here we go.
There's no sound.
Well, shoot. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Can you hear it now?
It is the spring of 1787.
Yeah, we can hear it. Yes.
The Revolutionary War has been over for only 6 years, and the young United States is still struggling in its infancy. Risings, boundary disputes, and the lack of a common vision all plagued the newborn country. In an effort to steady this precarious ship, the Confederation Congress calls on states to send delegates to the Grand Convention to begin on May 14th in Philadelphia. The delegates must draft revisions to the Articles of Confederation, which would then be considered by the Congress and approved by the states. Under the terms of the Articles, all 13 states had to agree to any changes. Since the purpose of the convention is just to make recommendations, not everyone is excited about attending. And frankly, some think it's a waste of time.
So some states consider not sending delegates at all because if you require every state to unanimously agree to any changes to the articles, most people assume that this meeting is going to be nothing more than a bunch of men bickering in a room and nothing's going to get accomplished. So a lot of people are apprehensive about traveling from Georgia or South Carolina or, you know, New Hampshire to Philadelphia. And the reason why it's in Philadelphia is it was more or less centrally located at that time. That's where the capital, the unofficial capital of the United States was at this time.
As men from different parts of the country began to travel down dusty, rutted roads on the way to Philadelphia, not all states send delegates. In fact, Rhode Island never even shows up. On May 14th, only 8 delegates, not states, but individual delegates, are present. So they wait. Finally, on May 25th, the necessary quorum of 7 states is achieved. In all, 55 delegates arrive in Philadelphia over the course of the convention. They are all white males, property owners, and the average age is about 44. Some are slaveholders, some had signed the Declaration of Independence, and almost all are well educated. Picture the delegates, James Madison and George Washington among them, sitting in Independence Hall in hot, humid Philadelphia. They're all wearing the dress of the day, frock coats, high collars, and thick pants. They vote to keep their discussions secret to encourage honest debate. But that means the windows are closed, and there is no air conditioning in 1787, not even an electric fan. And they'll sit in that sweltering heat in those heavy clothes for 3 months. Shockingly, they all keep their vow of secrecy. That could never happen today, not even for an hour-long meeting. Someone would share, James Madison thinks he's so smart, keyword, articles are dead, via social media, and the whole thing would be a disaster. But in 1787, there are no leaks, not even a drip that hints at what they are doing. And what they are doing is nothing short of overthrowing the very government that sent them there.
Let's remember, the objective was to consider revisions or amendments to the articles. It was not to throw out the articles and start over with a brand new centralized government that is, as we can assume, is going to have more central power. So what they were doing was extremely radical in its own nature because it was defeating the whole reason that they were there in the first place.
Within a few days, with only a 7-state quorum and only 6 of those states agreeing, a handful of men changed the course of history. They vote to get rid of the Articles of Confederation and write a new, more nationalistic document that becomes our Constitution. The risk is immense. Everyone on the outside assumes they were working on recommended revisions to the Articles. It's an incredible gamble, and even when the convention presents the signed Constitution on September 17th, not all delegates endorse it. The country will argue and debate for 2 more years before the document is adopted by the required 9 out of 13 states. But instead of punishing them for their deception, today we celebrate the wisdom and vision of those men in Philadelphia.
Okay, so that gave us a good overview of what was going on at this convention, because what we now know of as the Constitutional Convention essentially starts from scratch a brand new central government or system of government that's going to be far different than the articles. Okay, so if you would please go to the course page, and right under the video, there's for number 2, it says wanted a just right government. PDF chart that I would like you to put into Notability that we're going to work on together. So just to be clear, if you go to the course page right here that I'm highlighting, that link right there will take you to a PDF, and you're going to put that into Notability, and we're going to be working on this as we go through discussing the differences between these 3 governments. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before we get started here? Okay. So kind of just building on a little bit of what we discussed yesterday. We were talking about James Madison's kind of thought process here of if he's on his way, this is the way I like to look at it here. Okay, so sorry, hang on, I gotta let somebody in here. If I'm James Madison and I'm leaving Virginia to go to Philadelphia to be a part of this convention to revise the articles, my thought process is that the British government obviously was too powerful or too strong because it gave the king way too much power, and the king suppressed the rights of the people. The Articles is too weak and does not do enough to protect the rights of the people or allow the government to function in general. And then the government that he has in mind, that he more or less drafts before and during his trip to Philadelphia, is the basis of what the U.S. Constitution is today. A 3-branch system of government with significant more authority. All right. Fun fact about James Madison, he is the shortest president in history at 4 feet, 11 inches tall. So you learn something new every day. All right. So this is what you should have up on your screen. And what we're going to do here is we are going to go through this process of completing this chart. And we're going to go through this from one indicator at a time, from left to right. And we're going to be analyzing the description and applying it as to whether it would be something that would be occurring in the British monarchy during the time of the colonial rule, under the Articles of Confederation, and under the U.S. Constitution when it was created, and essentially under the same system that we have today, because the structure of the government, the foundation, is the same as it was in 1787. Okay, so just a couple things to keep in mind there, okay? So does everybody have this chart? If you do not have this chart in Notability and pulled up, please do so, because we are going to be going through this, and this completed chart is going to be your exit ticket today, okay? So if we think about this, and I'll be asking for people to raise their hands from time to time, but some of these are going to be more or less a formality. So when we look at this first indicator here, an executive or a king, it doesn't mean that it has to be a king. We're talking about any individual person that holds significant power. So an executive would be an individual person that has power. And obviously in the British monarchy, we know that that's an obvious characteristic, because a monarchy as a government is characteristic of having some kind of royal family or royal leader, okay? So we're going to put a check mark there. So you're going to have check marks where it is occurring, and I have dashes where it doesn't occur, or you can leave it blank. It's up to you, okay? Does everybody follow? And again, if you have a question, please just raise your hand and let me know, okay? Now, under the Articles of Confederation, if you want to chime in, please put your hand raising icon up. Do we have a situation where we have a king or an executive of any kind holding significant power, like an individual?
No.
Marcus?
No.
Yeah, no, we don't. And the reason why is because if the Articles of Confederation is set up in a way from the start, it's not going to give any significant power to an individual, because the fear is that they would turn into a monarch or a tyrant, just like King George III. Remember, more or less, we have to assume that this government, the Articles, is not going to mirror anything at all like the British monarchy. Otherwise, what was the whole point of the revolution? Okay. What about the U.S. Constitution? Do we have an executive or a king with the U.S. Constitution? Sinead?
No, I don't think so.
So we don't have an individual person holding any significant power, you don't think?
Oh, well, there's the president, but it's not like a dictator.
True. And let me, maybe I should clear that up a little bit more. When we talking about an executive, it doesn't have to be in the mindset of an authoritarian figure. It could be any person in government that holds significant power. So, and I would say that, after clarifying that, that would definitely be someone like the president. Okay. All right. Okay. A legislative branch. Do we see a legislative branch in the British monarchy? If you want to chime in, go ahead and put your hand raising icon up. So legislative branch would be the group of people that are responsible for making laws. Okay. So in the British, okay, Adela?
Yes. Like
Yeah.
Parliament.
Yep, you're exactly right. Parliament is responsible for making laws in Britain. So that would definitely be a legislative branch. What about the Articles of Confederation? Do we see a legislative branch in the Articles of Confederation? Okay, Sinead.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. It's actually, the Congress is the authority to make laws. Now, there's no guarantee, obviously, that we're going to have issue with those laws being approved necessarily or followed, but they do have legislative power to make laws. Okay. I'm going to start just calling on some people, if that's okay with you all, because I want to make sure that we are participating. And again, your screens are not on, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot on the screen. So let's see here. Krishil, do we have a situation where we would have a legislative branch in the U.S. Congress, or in the U.S. government, I should say, the U.S. Constitution?
Yes.
That's correct. It's a two-part house called Congress. We have House of Representatives and the Senate. Okay. Let's look at a judicial branch. Devin, do we see a judicial branch in the British monarchy?
Yes.
We do. Yes. The reason why we know that is because we have numerous examples of British officials and soldiers having trials in the court systems in Britain rather than in America, which was one of the grievances that was brought up in the Declaration of Independence. So let's see. Theo, what about the Articles of Confederation? Do we have a judicial branch, the court system?
Yes. No.
No, it's all right. That's okay. We don't. It's actually it's a big weakness that's often overlooked with the Articles, that it doesn't have a court system to, across the country, collectively protect the rights of the citizens. We have state courts and local courts, but we don't have a national court system that will protect the rights of citizens and guarantee those to be protected. What about the U.S. Constitution? Stephen, do we have a U.S. court in the U.S. Constitution, either from the beginning or today? Do we have a judicial branch?
Yes.
We do. Honestly, the biggest evidence that we have is the fact that we are in the midst of filling a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court. Amy Coney Barrett's going through the hearings right now in Congress, okay? So let's go to the next. First of all, let's kind of review here. So we do see some similarities between the British monarchy and the U.S. Constitution, and see obvious where there are gaps in power and authority under the Articles. Let's go to the next one where we have powers of government. So would the British monarchy have the power to enforce laws? Let's see here. Joyce.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. We know, obviously, and one of the discussions we had in class today with my other sections was, even though we know that there's defiance by the colonies to follow the laws, we know that they don't want to accept it. We do have situations, obviously, in Britain and in other colonies where the laws are being followed, and the enforcement power comes from the king directly. What about the Articles of Confederation? Paul, do we see a situation where the Articles of Confederation give the government the power to enforce laws?
No.
Yes, that's correct. They do not, because there is no, again, if you have no executive authority, you're not really going to have any authority to enforce laws. It's just that simple. What about the U.S. Constitution? Do we have the authority to, under the U.S. Constitution, to enforce laws? Cassidy?
Yes.
Okay. When the president signs his name to make a law official, he is enforcing the law through that process. Let's go to the next one. Did the British monarchy have the power to tax? Violet?
Yes.
Yes, it did. Okay. Even though we know that there was some defiance of these laws, Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, Tea Act, Sugar Act, these are all tax laws that were enforced by the British monarchy. And it wasn't as if everybody, defied it. There were people that did pay the law, obviously. What about under the Articles of Confederation? Maya? Do we see the power to tax?
No.
No, you're correct. And here's the big giveaway here. If the Articles wouldn't have the power to enforce laws, they wouldn't have the power to tax, because collecting taxes is the enforcement of the law. So that would go hand in hand. What about under the U.S. Constitution? Arlo?
Yes.
It does have the power to tax. Biggest way we can tell that is that if your families look at their paychecks and they see that there's a deduction for income tax, that tells us that the government is enforcing tax collection. Did the British monarchy have the power to protect the country? David, what do you think?
I believe that's a yes.
You are correct. It has the strongest military on earth, and part of the reason it has so much territory all over the world is because it has that enforcement power with its military. What about the Articles of Confederation? Let's see here. Joffer.
Say it again.
With the Articles of Confederation, did the Articles of Confederation have the power to protect the country?
No.
Did not. Honestly, the biggest evidence that we have of that is Shays' Rebellion. Okay, that was the reading that you looked at last week that we reviewed yesterday. If the federal government cannot intervene to protect the rights of the citizens or the people, then it's failed to do its primary job, which is to protect the citizens. What about under the U.S. Constitution? Let's see here. Acidi? With the U.S. Constitution? Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're correct. It obviously does. We have a very strong military presence today, and early on it was a process, but we did give the U.S. government authority to raise a military and enforce laws and protect citizens. Okay, let's go to the last one here, checks on government. So we have two standards that cover government. One is 8.1.6, which is about the beginnings of government, the foundations of government. And then 8.2.3 is about how government works. And it's based on two main ideas or two concepts, which is checks and balances and separation of power. Okay. So again, we see a lot of similarities so far between the British monarchy and the U.S. government under the U.S. Constitution. Let's see what we have here. Would the British monarchy have a system where the government was popularly elected? Now, again, popular election means people are voted into positions of power by the people. So do we see that in the British monarchy? Allie?
No,
Can you explain why we would not?
because there's kings and queens, and that's a monarchy.
And then what happens to the power of the monarchy over time? Do you
What?
remember? What happens to that power from the monarchy over time? Remember that process, that Thomas Paine assignment that was attacking that notion that of power being passed down? Remember what that's called?
No, sorry.
That's okay. So you're exactly right, because kings and queens gain power through hereditary succession. There's no informal or formal way of electing leaders because of that process, okay? And even Parliament, one part of Parliament, the House of Lords, passes that power down along the lines as well. It is true that the House of Commons does hold elections, but if really 2 out of the 3 of the biggest parts of the government are receiving power because of their family status, that's clearly not a popularly elected government. What about with the Articles of Confederation? Jack, what do you think on that?
Weren't the state representatives, weren't they elected?
You are correct.
Mm-hmm.
So state representatives and those same representatives that would go to Congress under the Articles of Confederation are still popularly elected. And what about the U.S. Constitution? Sammy? Sammy, what about the U.S. Constitution? Is the government popularly elected?
I think he said his iPad died.
I still see him in my class, or he's still showing up on the
No,
roster. So
No, that was me who said my iPad was going to die. But
okay, let's not worry about that. Okay, let's not worry about that. Right, Sammy, are you there? Okay, Chris, can you answer that for me?
Yes, the government was popularly
Yeah.
elected.
And we have overwhelming evidence of that going on right now because we have an election in 2 weeks where we're choosing members of Congress. All seats in the House of Representatives, by the way, are open, and the Senate, and obviously the presidency. All right. Checks and balances. Checks and balances is the idea that power in government can be checked or limited by other branches of government. What do we think about the British monarchy? Eileen, what do you think about that? Do you think they would have a system of checks and balances?
I don't think so.
I think you're correct. And the reason why is because ultimately the authority rests with the king. And if the king wants to overrule something, he will. What about with the Articles of Confederation? Simon, what do you think about that? Do you think there would be a system of checks and balances under the Articles of Confederation?
Yes.
Why do you think so? Not sure? You there?
Brain isn't working very well today.
That's okay. That's okay. Here's the reason why it wouldn't have a system of checks and balances, okay? If you look up here at the top, there's only one branch of government. To have a system of checks and balances, you need to have at least two branches of government. Because the idea is that when an action's taken by one branch, at least one other branch checks or limits that power. Like, for example, when the President of the United States chooses to fill a vacancy in the Supreme Court, his choice does not automatically get that position. They go through a process of answering questions and being interviewed by the Senate, which is what's going on right now. That's a good example of checks and balances. Just like if a law is going to be made in the legislative branch, it has to be approved or enforced by the president. What about the U.S. Constitution? Do we have a system of checks and balances there, Alex? Frank, can you jump in there for me?
Yeah, we do.
Yep.
You just kind of.
Yep, you're right. We have three branches. We're going to have a system of checks and balances. Okay, I'm going to go through the last column quickly because we're running out of time here. If there is no system of checks and balances, there's not going to be a system of separation of powers in the British monarchy, because separation of powers more or less means that the government's like the constitution of the government specifically defines roles that each part of the government does. And we're not going to see that with the Articles either, because the Articles is only made up of one singular branch. But we do see that with the U.S. Constitution. And so to reflect here, the big difference we're going to see here is obviously a major increase in government power, but the difference between that and the British monarchy is this system of checks and balances, which is going to limit the power that each branch has to not allow a monarchy or an abuse of power to take place with one, king or major leader ruling over everything. Okay. So we are about out of here. So what you need to do is you need to go to the course page, click on the exit ticket, and you're going to submit a picture. You're going to submit a picture or screenshot of your chart and submit that for today's exit ticket. Okay. And tomorrow when we meet, we're going to discuss the big picture here and discuss the convention and the themes that went through there. Okay. I will see you tomorrow. Thank you for joining and have a good rest of your day.